The first thing you notice is the quiet. Not the peaceful kind, the other kind. The kind that sits in your chest like a stone. A two-lane highway in northern Arizona, just after sunrise. The sky is still deciding what color it wants to be. A pickup truck sits on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking slowly and apologetically. On one side of the car, a teenage boy stands with his hands jammed in his pockets. On the other side, his father has just opened the crate, and in the dust between them is a starving bobcat. He's smaller than you'd expect a wild bobcat to be, all angles and shadows. Ribs showing under matted fur, paws too big for the rest of him. The crate door swings open, and for a second, nothing happens. No dramatic leap into the sagebrush, no Hollywood sprint toward freedom. Just stillness. Then the bobcat steps out. One paw, then another. He blinks against the thin desert light, nose twitching, trying to make sense of cold air and gasoline and fear. This is the moment Derek thought he was ready for. He's the one who drove them out here after all. He's the one who called the wildlife folks and heard the words, "You can't keep a bobcat, it's illegal, it's dangerous." He's the one who rehearsed the same line in his head all morning. This is the right thing. This is how it has to be. He told himself that over the hum of the engine, over the sound of his son's silence in the passenger seat. He told himself that when he turned off onto this empty stretch of highway, far from any houses. He told himself that when he cut the ignition and the cab went still, but nothing, he told himself, prepared him for what happened next. Because when the bobcat, the one his son named Marlowe, steps out of the crate, he doesn't bolt into the brush. He doesn't even look at the open land in front of him. He turns and looks back. Not at the boy, at the man, at Derek. There's something about that look. You could argue, if you wanted to, that a bobcat's face is hard to read. Wild animals don't make people express. They don't frown or pout or plead. But if you've ever lived with an animal, if you've ever had a dog tilt its head when you picked up a suitcase, or a cat stare at you from the carrier at the vet, you know. The body says what the mouth can't. Marlowe's eyes go straight to Derek, steady and hollowed out by hunger, not wide with panic, not narrowed in anger. Just asking. Not in words, but in a feeling that lands heavy. Why are you doing this, Dad? That's the part Derek wasn't ready for. He feels it hit him low, below logic, below everything the rehab center told him over the phone. This is supposed to be responsible. This is supposed to be safer for everyone. This is what a good father does when his son has made a dangerous mistake. But standing there on the shoulder of that road, with the smell of hot brakes and desert dust in the air, he doesn't feel like a good father. He feels like a man opening a door and walking away from someone who trusts him. Behind him, the boy, Noah, shifts his weight, gravel crunching under his boots. He keeps his eyes on the horizon, jaw clenched. He doesn't dare look at Marlowe. He doesn't dare look at his dad, because if he does, he's not sure which one will hurt more. If you're a parent, or you've ever had to make a hard call with someone you love watching, you might recognize that knot in Derek's throat. That moment where you're doing what every guidebook, every brochure, every expert says is right, and it still feels like betrayal. On paper, the situation is simple. A wild bobcat doesn't belong in a tack room behind a ranch house. It's illegal. It's dangerous. It can end badly for the animal and for people. Derek knows that. The game warden who answered his call knows that. Somewhere in town, there are pamphlets in a rack at the visitor center that say exactly that. But out here, on this empty stretch of highway, the situation isn't paper. It's fur and bones and trust. Marlowe takes one small step toward the truck instead of away from it. His paws press into the shoulder gravel, claws not bothering to grip. He's not reading the horizon for threats. He's reading the man in front of him. And Derek brakes. Not loudly, not in a movie way. There's no shouting, no pounding the hood of the truck. It's quieter than that. His shoulders tighten for just a second, then drop, like something inside him let go. His hand, the one still holding the crate door, trembles. He looks away from Marlowe, not because he doesn't care, but because he cares so much, he can't stand what's looking back at him. Most lives don't crack open at weddings or funerals. They crack open on mornings like this. On roads you've driven 100 times, with a single look that tells you you've crossed a line you can't uncross. If you've ever had a moment where someone, or some creature, looked at you as if you were the one who chose the hurt, you know how long it stays with you. Years later you might forget the date. You won't forget the eyes. The wind picks up a little. A tumbleweed bumps half-heartedly against the guardrail. Somewhere far off, a semi's engine hums like distant thunder. Noah finally risks a glance over his shoulder and meets Marlowe's gaze for a heartbeat before dropping it again. He will replay that heartbeat in his sleep for a long time. For now, nobody moves. And maybe that's the part worth holding on to. The pause. The space where everyone in this little circle, man, boy, bobcat, feels the weight of what's happening, even if they can't name it yet. Responsibility, fear, love that tried to help and ended up harming. As you listen to this, you might find your own memories drifting up. A conversation on a driveway, a goodbye at a hospital bed, a dog you had to leave with someone else because life closed in too fast. If those moments are close to the surface, you're not alone here. You're in good company. Because this story isn't just about a wild bobcat on an Arizona highway. It's about what happens to us when we realize, too late, that someone trusted us more than we knew. In a minute, we're going to rewind. We'll go back to where Marlowe came from, to the ranch at the edge of the high desert, to the choices that led a boy and his father to this shoulder of road. For now, if this scene is already stirring something inside you, stay with it. Take a breath with Derek on that gravel. Hold that look from Marlowe for just a second longer. We'll go back to the beginning in the next part. Every story that breaks your heart usually starts smaller than you remember. Before the highway shoulder, before the open crate and the starving bobcat staring up at a grown man, it was just a sound on the edge of the property. A thin, ragged cry carried on the dry wind. It was late afternoon on the ranch, that hour when the sun hangs low and everything looks a little tired. Noah was supposed to be fixing a loose board on the back fence. Instead, he heard it again, a high, desperate sound from the wash that cut behind the far pasture. He could have gone back to the house. He could have called his dad. But he didn't. He followed the sound. Down in the dry wash, tangled in brittle grass and rusted wire, he found him, a tiny bobcat, hardly bigger than a house cat. One front leg caught in an old snare someone had forgotten decades ago. The line dug into the fur, into the skin. The kitten's body shook with every breath, eyes glassy but locked on Noah like he was the last thing in the world. Noah knelt in the dust. He didn't think about wildlife laws. He didn't think about how wild bobcats belong to the land, not to people. All he saw was a creature in pain, alone. And if you've ever found something that small and helpless, you know that pull. It's not logical. It's older than that. He worked the wire loose with shaking hands, talking under his breath even though the bobcat didn't understand the words. There you go. Easy. I've got you. You're okay. When the leg came free, the kitten didn't run. He just collapsed sideways, too weak to move. That was the moment Noah made the choice that would send them all to that highway months later. He picked him up. Instead of calling the game warden, instead of driving into town to the vet or the rehab center the way the pamphlets say you should, Noah tucked that bobcat against his chest and carried him home like a secret. On the way, he already had a name in his head. Marlowe. He didn't tell Derek. Not that day. Not that week. Out behind the main house, there was an old tack room nobody used anymore. Noah cleared a space in the corner, lined it with an old horse blanket, and found a cardboard box to make a den. He used his own water bottle cap as a dish. That night, the ranch house lights glowed warm, and Noah sat out in that dusty room with a flashlight, holding a syringe of kitten formula and watching video after video about how to feed orphaned wildlife. You could say, in a way, that Marlowe ended up with two dads. One was out there somewhere in the hills, a wild bobcat, maybe still pacing the ridgeline, calling for a kitten who never answered. In a real bobcat family, the mother teaches her young where to hide, how to climb away from coyotes, how to stalk rabbits in that blue hour just before dawn. She passes down a map of the land in paw steps and shares meals. That's how a wild bobcat becomes what it's meant to be. The other, Dad, was inside the tack room, 15 years old, hands smelling like hay and motor oil, determined to do this on his own. Noah set alarms on his phone for feedings. He mixed the formula in his mom's old measuring cup and scribbled notes on a sheet of cardboard. 2 a.m., half syringe. 4 a.m., more. Marlowe began to recognize the sound of the door hinges. His tiny body relaxed when Noah came in, when the light snapped on, when the soft scrape of a food bowl hit the floor. And just 100 yards away, inside the house, Derek washed up at the sink, thinking his son was finally sleeping better. That's the other side of this story. Two different fathers under the same roof. One is trying to keep the ranch running, paying off repair bills and making sure the trucks don't break down. The other was trying to keep a wild baby alive in a borrowed room, whispering, "It's okay, I'm here." Because he needed someone to say that to him, too. If you've ever watched a kid pour their whole heart into something you know is risky, you know the ache. Maybe it was a puppy they weren't ready for. Maybe it was a relationship you could see from the start that would hurt them. You want to step in. You also don't want to crush the one thing that's getting them out of bed in the morning. For Noah, Marlowe became that one thing. He talked more to the bobcat than he did to his own father. He told him about the uncle they'd lost the year before, about how the house felt too big now, about the way silence rang in the kitchen where laughter used to live. Marlowe didn't answer, but he listened in the way animals do, with their whole body. While Noah learned how to warm formula to just the right temperature, another story was still unfolding just beyond the fence line. One he didn't see. Out in the hills, wild bobcat mothers moved their litters from den to den, teaching them one crucial lesson at a time. How to freeze when a truck passes. How to avoid the bright scent of fresh metal and oil the way you'd avoid fire. How to trust the wind. Those young bobcats had a mother's eyes on them. Marlowe had Noah's. It wasn't that Noah didn't care, it's that he cared so much he couldn't imagine letting go. And that's where love can get tangled, can't it? When the feeling is pure, but the plan is missing. Derek eventually noticed the extra cans of tuna on the grocery list. The way Noah slipped out after dinner, the tired circles under his eyes. He knocked on the tack room door once and found it locked. He stood there for a long time, hand on the knob, deciding to walk away instead of pressing. He told himself he was giving his son space. Those boys need secrets sometimes. That he'd bring it up when things settled down. They didn't. By the time Derek finally saw Marlowe, the bobcat wasn't a fragile bundle of fur anymore. He was pacing the length of the stall, muscles forming under his spotted coat, pupils blown wide whenever someone new came close. That was the first true collision between the two dads in this story. The boy who tried to save a life in secret, and the man who had to think about neighbors, laws, and what happens when a wild animal grows up inside 4 wooden walls. In the next part, we'll sit with that collision. We'll see how one close call with a neighbor's dog, one phone call to a wildlife rehab center, and one late-night drive set them all on the path to that highway shoulder. As you listen, you might remember a time you stepped in to rescue something, or someone, without really knowing the rules yet. If a memory is stirring, it's okay to let it be here with you. We're going to walk through what happened next, gently. Some lines you only know you've crossed when you're already on the other side. For Noah and Derek, that line showed up on an ordinary Tuesday, in the space of about 10 seconds. It started with barking, not from their place, but from next door, the neighbor's spaniel, high-pitched and frantic. Noah was in the tack room refilling Marlowe's water bowl, humming under his breath. The young bobcat was bigger now, his spotted coat filling out, paws heavy as he paced the stall. He'd begun to test the world, pushing against the crate, swatting at shadows, lunging at Noah's shoelaces with a strength that didn't feel kitten anymore. The barking got closer. Then came the scramble of claws on concrete. The spaniel had squeezed under the back fence, nose working overtime, following the smell of raw meat that clung to that old room. The dog appeared in the open doorway just as Marlowe hit the end of his patience. The wild bobcat slammed into the side of his crate with a sound Noah had never heard before. Not a soft mewl, not the rusty purr he'd come to love, but something deeper, raw. His body launched forward, claws hooking through the metal, teeth snapping at the air. The crate rocked, tipped, and crashed against the wall. For a split second, Noah saw the future. The future where the crate door didn't latch all the way. The future where 40 pounds of instinct and hunger met 20 pounds of trusting dog in a space the size of a closet. He moved on instinct too. He grabbed the spaniel's collar, yanked him back just as Marlowe's paw shot through the bars, claws grabbing nothing but air. The dog yelped, heart pounding against Noah's hand. Noah shoved him out the door, kicked it shut, and stood there, chest heaving, listening to Marlowe hurl himself against the crate again and again. The line had been there the whole time. That was the moment they finally saw it. A wild bobcat is not a house cat with extra spots. In his stall, Marlowe paced like an animal that didn't understand the walls that held him. Out in the Arizona hills, bobcats this age were already stalking rabbits at dusk, learning where to cross dry washes safely, memorizing every sound the land made. They were burning off their energy in miles, not in 4 frantic steps back and forth. Noah sat down hard on an overturned bucket, hands still shaking. Love and fear crowded his chest at the same time. He looked at the crumpled side of the crate, at the deep grooves his rescued bobcat had carved into the wood. For the first time, the thought formed clearly. I might not be able to keep him safe. I might not be able to keep anyone safe. A few minutes later, the neighbor came around the corner, dog in tow, asking if everything was okay. Dare heard the voices from the house, came out wiping his hands on a rag, and walked straight into the scene. His son, pale as chalk, the neighbor apologizing. The tackroom door closed a little too quickly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He just said, "Open it." When he saw Marlowe, there was no denying it anymore. This wasn't a half-wild baby he could pretend was temporary. This was a young bobcat whose muscles bunched when Derek stepped close, whose eyes locked on every movement like a predator, not a pet. There were scratches on the wall, deep gouges where claws had tested wood. The crate was listed at an angle, one bar bent from the impact. There are conversations you can't put off after a sight like that. That night, after the neighbor went home and the spaniel had stopped shaking, Derek sat at the kitchen table with a stack of mail pushed off to the side and his phone on speaker. He called the wildlife rehab center in town. He thought he was calling for a simple solution. He didn't get one. The woman on the line listened quietly. She didn't shame him. She didn't yell. She explained how wild animals, bobcats included, are protected in most states. Keeping one without permits is against the law, even if your intentions are good. Most hand-raised bobcats don't know how to hunt, how to avoid people, or how to survive in the wild. She used a word that made Noah flinch when Derek repeated it later. Imprinted. It meant Marlowe didn't just know humans. He'd patterned himself around them. He trusted the sound of boots and buckets more than the rustle of sagebrush. That trust could get him killed out there and get someone hurt in here. The rehab center gave them clear guidance. They couldn't just keep him. There were legal risks. There were safety risks. There were also limits on what the center could do. They were full. Sanctuaries had wait lists. If a bobcat were too human-centered and too aggressive, sometimes there were no good outcomes. It wasn't a villain speech. It was reality. Then came the part that lodged in Derek's gut. Whatever you do, please don't just drop him off in the woods. He doesn't know how to be wild. Derek, if you've ever sat at a table like that, late at night, with someone's future in your hands and no option that feels clean. You know that quiet. The clock is ticking too loudly. The refrigerator hums. The weight of doing nothing versus the fear of doing something wrong. By morning, Derek had made a decision. Not because he was cold-hearted, because he was scared. Scared of the law. Scared of what would happen if a neighbor's kid got curious and walked into that tack room. Scared of what the authorities might do if they showed up and found an illegal wild bobcat on his property. He told there were no suitcases, no goodbye party. Just an old crate loaded into the bed of the pickup. A thin blanket, a shaky promise that this was for the best. Noah carried Marlowe out himself. The bobcat pressed against his chest, just like he had that first day from the wash. But heavier now, warmer, more real. Sometimes the line you cross is a law written in a book. Sometimes it's a moment when love becomes something else, something that puts others at risk. A lot of us have stood right here, hearts in the right place, map in the wrong hand. In the next part, we're going to leave the ranch and ride along in that truck. We'll see yet. For now, if you're listening and thinking, I've made choices I wish I could redo, take a breath. Stay with us. This story isn't finished yet. When the truck pulled away, there was no big moment. No slow-motion leap into the sunset. No triumphant music. Just dust settling. The highway curved out of sight, carrying Derek and Noah back toward town. And for a long time after the engine noise faded, Marlowe simply stood there. A young bobcat, alone on the shoulder of a northern Arizona road, ribs showing under his coat, ears tilted toward a sound that wasn't coming back. The crate sat behind him, door still open, blanket crumpled inside. In front of him, the high desert stretched out in every direction. Sagebrush, scattered juniper, low hills smudged in the distance. It might have looked like freedom. To Marlowe, it didn't look like anything at all. A truly wild bobcat of his age would have known what to do. Out in the hills, most young bobcats spend months shadowing their mothers, copying every move. They learn where rabbits feed at dusk, which washes stay wet longest after rain, and how to slip across dirt roads without being seen. That knowledge doesn't come from a single instinct. It comes from practice, repetition, 1,000 tiny lessons passed down in paw prints. Marlowe's lessons were different. He knew the click of a door latch, the hum of a mini-fridge, the pattern of Noah's footsteps on the tack room floor. For him, the sound of a pickup truck had always meant food, warmth, and a hand on the other side of a bowl. So when the truck disappeared, his body didn't feel free. It felt unhooked. He stepped off the gravel shoulder cautiously, paws sinking into powdery soil. The sage scratched his legs. He lowered his nose to the ground, searching for something familiar, but all he found was dust, old tire tracks, and the faint ammonia of roadside weeds. He circled back to the spot where the crate had been carried out of the truck. The scent of Noah's flannel lingered there, mingled with engine oil. Marlowe lay down in that patch as the sun climbed higher, as if he could wait for the world to be back to what it used to be. If you've ever walked out of a hospital without the person you went in with, or stood in a quiet house after everyone's gone, you might recognize that feeling. The walls might be gone, but you don't feel free. You feel misplaced. As the first day wore on, hunger started to press in. Not the soft ache he knew from waiting an extra hour for a bowl, but something sharper, colder. He rose and followed the only trail he trusted, the smell of asphalt. The highway was a ribbon of heat. Trucks and cars slipped by at 65 miles an hour, a river of noise and metal. Old bobcats usually avoid roads like this. They feel the vibration long before they reach the edge and turn back into cover. No one ever taught Marlowe that. He moved parallel to the pavement, keeping close, half expecting the blue pickup to reappear, half afraid it would. A semi roared past, wind buffeting his thin frame. He flinched too late, nearly losing his balance. The driver never saw the starving bobcat hugging the ditch line, small against all that distance. As evening came, the desert changed tone. The light turned honey gold, shadows stretching long. This is when wild bobcats usually come alive, sliding out of their daytime cover, muscles full, heads low, reading the ground for movement. Some of them will live 10, 12 years that way, carving out territories, raising litters, sharing the land with foxes, owls, coyotes, and more often, us. Marlowe didn't know any of that. He only knew that when the sun dropped, the warmth went with it. He curled under a scrubby bush, trying to make himself small against the sudden cold. His stomach twisted. His paw, still scarred from that first old trap in the wash months ago, throbbed on the rough ground. He slept in short jolts, waking at every sound. A distant coyote yip, the hiss of a passing car, the rustle of dry grass. On the second day, he found trash. A fast food bag lay crumpled near a turnout, the kind of place where folks pull off to check maps or stretch their legs. He nosed it open, licking at the greasy paper, scraping his tongue along the inside of a sauce cup until there was nothing left. For a few minutes, his body believed it had been fed. Then the hollow returned, deeper than before. Out in the hills, a wild bobcat might have followed a rabbit trail, tested its skill against something that could run, missed the first 3 tries, and finally caught the 4th. The chase, the pounce, the warm weight of a meal. Those are the things that tell a bobcat, you belong here. For Marlowe, belonging had always tasted like canned meat and human hands. By the 3rd morning, his steps were uneven. He found a small puddle near a culvert where rainwater had collected, drank too fast, and vomited minutes later. Still, he went back to it because thirst doesn't care about pride. He lay down beside the culvert afterward, his sides heaving, listening to a world that felt too big. There's a story we like to tell ourselves about nature, that if you just set an animal free, instinct will flip on like a switch. And yes, wildness is strong. But when a creature has been fed from a bowl, cradled in arms, sung to under a bare bulb in a shed, the wild doesn't feel like home at first. It feels like exile. You may have lived your own version of that, moving to a town that was supposed to be a fresh start, changing careers because everyone said it was the smart move, only to find yourself standing in a life that didn't come with a map. The people around you might call it freedom. Inside, it feels more like standing on the shoulder of a highway, waiting for someone to come back. On the 4th evening, as the sky turned that soft lavender the desert does so well, Marlowe drifted farther from the original turnout. His body was just following the faint smell of gasoline and rubber, the only constants left. The land fell away into a low dip, then rose again toward a quieter county road. Headlights appeared in the distance, moving more slowly than the others had. Not rushing, not roaring, just easing their way along the curves as if the driver knew too well what could be hidden at the edge of the beam. Marlowe stepped out of the brush and paused at the white line, silhouetted against the fading light. A young bobcat caught between worlds and between heartbeats, held in that thin space where everything could still go either way. In the next part, we're going to meet the person in that truck. Someone who had learned the hard way not to look away from hurt on the side of the road. If you've ever felt a little like Marlowe here, not quite at home where you came from, not sure how to survive where you've landed, stay with this story. You're not the only one who's ever stood in that in-between. By the time the truck rolled to a stop, twilight had settled over the desert like a thin blanket. The engine clicked as it cooled. The heater's hum faded. For a moment, it was just the sound of wind brushing dry grass and one woman's breath as she leaned forward, squinting through the windshield at a shape on the road. It was small, too long-legged to be a housecat, too still to be at ease. A young bobcat. Marlowe. Evelyn didn't slam on the brakes. She'd been driving these back roads for years, and caution had become second nature. She eased the truck over, hazard lights blinking soft amber in the dimming light, and shut off the engine. You can learn a lot about a person by what they do in that first, quiet minute. Evelyn didn't rush. She opened her door, stepped down, and stood for a moment just feeling the air. Cold, high desert air, with that metallic edge that tells you night is coming. Then she walked toward the starving bobcat, slow and sideways, making herself smaller instead of larger. From 10 feet away, she could see enough.
This wasn't a wild bobcat in its right place, spooked by headlights and ready to vanish. This was an animal too thin, too tired, watching her without real fear. His body said he'd already given up on running. She stopped just inside the reach of his eyes and did the thing most people forget to do. She called for help. Her phone buzzed against her palm as she scrolled to a familiar number. The on-call line for the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center she'd volunteered with for years. While the sun sank another inch, she spoke quietly into the receiver, giving the basics. County Road 17, just past the old mile marker. Young bobcat, underweight, not acting like a wild one should. On the other end, a rehabber named Tom asked a handful of questions. The kind that sound clinical, but carry a lot of care. Is he mobile? Any obvious injuries? How close can you get? Is there traffic? Then came the part that matters for all of us listening. Tom reminded her gently of the rules. Wild animals, especially predators like bobcats, aren't pets. In most states, it's illegal to keep them without permits, even if your heart is in the right place. Human handling can imprint them, can make it hard or impossible for them to ever live as a true wild bobcat again. If you find one in trouble, you don't scoop it up and take it home because you feel called to rescue. You call somebody trained. You use expert hands. Evelyn knew that. She also knew something else. Sometimes the someone trained is miles away, and you're the only person standing between an animal and a bad ending. Tom's voice was calm. We'll send the transport crate. 20 minutes, maybe 30. Keep your distance, keep an eye on him, and don't try to feed him. His system's fragile. So she did exactly that. She sat down on the cold gravel, not staring straight at Marlowe, just letting him know she was there. She spoke now and then, not cooing, not claiming him, just a simple, steady presence. All right, buddy, you're not invisible. Somebody sees you. If you've ever knelt on a roadside with a hurt dog, or waited by a child's hospital bed for the doctor to come back, you understand that strange mix of power and helplessness. You can't fix everything, but you can stay. Evelyn knew a lot about staying. Years earlier, she'd done something very similar with a fox kid her daughter had brought home. They'd tried to raise him themselves before they knew better. He hadn't made it. That little loss had opened a bigger one, a rift between Evelyn and her daughter about blame, responsibility, and what they should have done. Volunteering with the rehab had been her way of making a different choice the next time a wild creature crossed her path. The second truck arrived just as the sky turned fully blue-gray. Tom stepped out with a large transport crate and a blanket. Together, he and Evelyn moved with practiced care. He guided her on how to lay the blanket gently over Marlowe to calm his senses, how to slide him into the crate without grabbing or wrestling, and how to keep everyone safe. It wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. That's something worth saying out loud. Real rescue work usually doesn't look like viral videos. It looks like training, permits, quiet coordination over crackling phone lines, and a lot of time spent doing things slowly so nobody gets hurt. By the time they reached Evelyn's property, a modest place with cottonwoods, an old shed, and a line of solar lights along the front walk, night had settled in. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and something baking. Inside, the house of misfits was already waiting. On a bed near the heater, Hank, the retired hound, lifted his head at the sound of the door. He'd come here after his hunting days ended, joints too worn to keep up, no one else willing to take on an old dog. On the back of the couch, Lula tucked her one good eye over her paws, a street cat turned indoor queen after a car clipped her on a rainy night. In a tall crate by the window, Rufus, the raven with a crooked wing, clicked his beak softly, forever half-wild, forever grounded. Evelyn set Marlowe's crate near, but not too near, the wood stove. She draped her jacket over part of it to give him a dark corner. Then she did something that might sound small but isn't. She sat down on the floor. No reaching through the bars, no whispered promises he couldn't understand. Just a woman, a bobcat, and the steady crackle of firewood. In the days that followed, this little house would become a different kind of home for Marlowe. Not a pet home,
not a wild home. A carefully managed middle place under the eye of a licensed rehab, with vet visits, decisions about permits, and hard questions about what his future should be. A place where Evelyn's quiet grief over the animals she'd lost and the people she'd drifted from could soften, step by step, as she watched this bobcat learn slowly to breathe like he wasn't bracing for the next bad thing. It's easy to think of rescue as a one-way gift, humans saving animals. But in a house like Evelyn's, it's a loop. Every life that comes through the door brings its own lesson about how to keep going when you feel like you don't quite belong anywhere. In the next part, we're going to shift our view. While Marlowe learns the rhythms of this new place, Noah is back on the ranch, replaying every choice that led to that highway. 2 paths, 1 wound. For now, if you've ever felt drawn to save a wild animal yourself, tuck this away gently. Your heart is needed, but so are the people who know the laws, the medicine, the behavior. If you want to help, learning who your local wildlife rehabbers are is a powerful first step. Some messes you can sweep up, others just sit in the air between people. After the highway, the ranch didn't look any different. The same fences, the same feed buckets are by the barn, the same porch light is buzzing a little too bright over the front steps. But inside that sameness, everything had shifted. Noah felt it first in his hands. They didn't seem to know what to do anymore. The tack room was empty now, just a faint ring of dust where the crate had been, a few claw marks on the boards, a stray tuft of bobcat fur caught in a splinter. He'd walk out there, stand in the doorway, and then turn around without crossing the threshold, like stepping in might make it all real again. Derek felt it in the spaces he avoided. He started parking the truck on the other side of the house, away from the view of the dirt road where they'd driven out with Marlowe in the back. He threw himself into repairs that didn't need to be done yet. He stayed late at the shop, saying the ranch needed the extra cash, even when the books didn't agree. 2 paths, 1 wound. On the surface, it looked like they were dealing with it the same way, quietly. No more arguments about the bobcat, no more slammed doors. Just a sort of truce built out of not saying the word Marlowe out loud. But silence has textures if you listen. Noah's silence was sharp. It cut him every time he opened his phone and almost scrolled to the old photos he'd taken in the tack room. Every time he lay down at night and his body expected to wake up for a feeding that would never come. He kept replaying that look on the highway, the way Marlowe had stared past him, straight at his father, as if asking a question neither of them knew how to answer. One night, when the house had finally gone still, he did something he hadn't done back when he first found the bobcat in the wash. He looked up what he should have done. "Found bobcat, baby. What do I do?" "Can you raise a wild bobcat?" "Illegal to keep bobcat in Arizona." The screen filled with rehab websites and Department of Wildlife pages. He read about imprinting, about wild animals that grow up thinking people are safe when they shouldn't. He read about bobcats hit on highways because they don't fear cars, about confiscated pet predators who end up in crowded shelters, some of them with nowhere to go. For the first time, the story he'd told himself, that he'd saved Marlowe, got complicated. He started drafting an email, erasing it and starting again. Finally, he sent a message to a wildlife rehab center a few towns over. He didn't sign his full name. He just wrote, "I took in a young bobcat a while back. I thought I was helping. We let him go because we were scared of the law. I don't know if he survived. I'm sorry." What happens to ones like that? He expected the reply to sting. Judgment, a warning, maybe a reminder that what he'd done was against the rules. It didn't come that night, or the next. Meanwhile, Derek's silence was heavier, slower. It settled in his shoulders, in the way he'd pause with his hand on the coffee pot in the morning, staring just a little too long at the steam. He didn't have the language Noah had. He didn't search for terms on his phone. He turned on the TV for background noise and turned the volume down too low to hear. In his mind, he kept one scene running. Marlowe, at the edge of the road, eyes hollow, stepping toward the truck instead of away.
He had done what the rehab woman said not to do. He had just taken him out and dropped him off because the thought of anyone showing up with a citation and a gun had terrified him. If you've ever chosen out of fear, only to realize later it hurt exactly what you were trying to protect, you know the taste that leaves behind. It's bitter and it lingers. A week later, Noah's email finally got an answer. The subject line was simple. Bobcat question. The body was even simpler. Thank you for writing. Many human-raised bobcats do struggle. Some are found and get help. We actually took in a young male recently from your area, off County Road 17. Thin, but alive. He's with an experienced foster and under permit. We can't share details, but I want you to know. His story didn't end on the side of the road. If you'd like to help wild animals in the future, the best thing you can do is call us before you intervene. You clearly care. With the right information, that care can save a lot of lives. Attached was a link to a short local news clip, a minute-long segment about a young bobcat rescued from a rural road, now in rehabilitation. The footage was grainy, but there was no mistaking the shape in the crate. Too thin, ears too big, those same eyes. Behind him, just for a moment, the camera caught a woman moving past with the jacket over her arm. Evelyn. Noah's breath left him all at once. He watched the clip 3 times. On the 4th, he carried the phone into the kitchen and set it in front of Derek without a word. They watched together. His hand stayed flat on the table, fingers spread like he was trying to anchor himself. He's alive, Noah said finally. It came out half statement, half question. Over the next few weeks, small changes unfolded. On Saturdays, instead of sleeping until noon, Noah started getting up early to volunteer at the small animal shelter in town. Scooping kennels, walking dogs, folding. He paid attention now when the staff talked about protocols, vaccines, and temperament tests. He asked how they decide when an animal can be adopted and when it needs more time. He listened when someone mentioned the rehab center needing drivers to transport injured wildlife. Derek noticed, even if he didn't comment much. He called the rehab center once himself. Not about Marlowe, but to ask a basic question about what to do if he ever found a hurt deer by the road. He wrote down the answer on an index card and stuck it on the fridge with a magnet. 2 people, same house. Each finds their own way to carry the same wound. Sometimes healing doesn't start with, "I'm sorry." Sometimes it starts with, "What do I do now?" And the quiet decision to do better next time. In the next part of this story, that question will get bigger. The rehab center, the state wildlife officer, and Evelyn will have to decide what kind of life Marlowe can safely live. We'll step into the hard conversations about permits, sanctuaries, and what it really means to love a wild animal without trying to own it. For now, if you're listening and thinking about a choice you'd make differently today, let that be a gentle thing. You can't rewrite what happened, but like Noah and Derek, you can decide what story you help write from here. Some decisions don't come with a right answer, just a list of trade-offs and a knot in your chest. By the time spring rolled over Evelyn's place, Marlowe looked less like a ghost and more like a young bobcat again. His hips were no longer sharp points. His coat had a dull shine instead of that brittle, starved look. He moved with more certainty in his muscles, less wobble in his steps. But underneath all that, something hadn't changed. Whenever someone he didn't know stepped into the yard, he came toward the fence instead of away from it. The rehab center needed to decide what to do about that. For months now, Evelyn had been following their plan. Marlowe stayed in a roomy enclosure built off the side of her old shed, with perches and hiding boxes and places to climb. She fed him on a schedule, using tongs instead of her hands, avoiding the kind of cuddling that had blurred the line for him in the first place. Vets came out to check his weight, his blood work, his old snare scar. He was safe, fed, protected, but he was still a bobcat who had learned that humans meant food and relief, not something to avoid. On a soft April morning, a state wildlife officer named Cole came out with Tom from the rehab to do an assessment. The cottonwoods were just leafing out. Rufus muttered to himself from his perch. Hank snored by the porch steps. Marlowe padded along the perimeter of his enclosure, tail flicking slowly, eyes alert. They watched him for a long time before anyone spoke. Cole broke the silence first.
"He doesn't act like the wild bobcats we release," he said, mostly to Tom, but loud enough for Evelyn to hear. "A healthy one should be trying to get as far from us as possible." Tom nodded. "He's still too interested in people. He orients to our voices."
Evelyn felt that line sink in. Too interested in people. She had done everything they'd asked. Minimal talking. No, treating him like a pet. No, good boy when he finally ate. Still, those first months of being raised in a tack room by a teenager had written something into his bones she couldn't erase. They sat at Evelyn's kitchen table with coffee, a stack of papers between them. The air smelled like toast and wood smoke. It could have been any ordinary morning, except for the weight of what they were about to put in ink. Tom laid out the options as gently as he could. Option 1. Try to release Marlowe back into the wild. The list of risks was long. He might approach hikers or campsites looking for food. He might cross roads without fear and end up under a truck. He might wander onto a property where someone didn't see a once rescued bobcat, just a threat, and reach for a gun. Option 2. Send him to a larger sanctuary several hours away. They had more space, more staff, and more experience with non-releasable wild cats. They also had a waiting list and 100 other animals needing care. Marlowe would be one story among many. Option 3. Keep things as they were, only make them official. Evelyn would apply for a special permit through the state to house one non-releasable bobcat under the rehab center's umbrella. She'd agree to enclosure standards, record-keeping, and unannounced inspections. She'd have to submit a plan for what would happen if her health failed, or she needed to move. In return, Marlowe would get to stay in the only place that had been consistently kind to him. "It's not about who loves him more," Tom said quietly. "It's about what gives him the safest, most stable life a bobcat like this can have." Evelyn stared at the paperwork. If you've ever sat with a loved one's medical forms or talked through living arrangements with an aging parent, you know that feeling. No column gives you exactly what you wish you could offer. There's no box for the way this should have gone. That night, after they left, she took her journal out to the porch. The sky over the desert was a dark bowl full of stars. Down below, she could hear Marlowe moving in his enclosure, the soft thump of him jumping down from his platform, the rustle as he settled. She wrote without editing, the way you talk to someone who won't interrupt. "Am I wanting him to stay because it's best for him?" the pen scratched. "Or because I don't want to lose another one?" She thought about the fox kid years ago, the way her daughter had blamed her for not getting help sooner, the way the house had gone quiet after that argument. She thought about all the animals who'd passed through her doors since then, healing, leaving, some not making it, each one taking a tiny bit of her heart with them. Marlowe had brought something different into the house. Not because he was a bobcat, but because he sat in that strange middle place, too wild to curl up on a couch, too human-centered to disappear into the hills. Like a person who's lived in too many foster homes, never quite sure where they belong. The next morning she called Tom. "If the sanctuary has space, and you think he'd do better there, I'll let him go," she said. "If not, I'm willing to take on the permit. I just need to know we're not keeping him here because I'm afraid to be alone." Tom was quiet for a moment. "The sanctuary director and I talked after we left. They're at capacity for big cats. If they take him, they'd have to say no to another case that has no fallback option. Here, he has you, and he has us. It's not perfect, but it's solid." Sometimes the hardest kind of love is the one that accepts not perfect and still shows up. Evelyn filled out the forms. She measured the enclosure twice, added a second shelter box, and improved the climbing structures. She wrote down Hank and Lula and Rufus as companion animals in residence, even though none of them would ever share space with Marlowe. She named Tom as backup caregiver, added the rehab center's contact information, and made sure there were instructions in a folder by the door for what to do with one non-releasable bobcat if she ended up in the hospital. When the permit finally came through,
It arrived in a plain envelope. No ribbon, no fanfare. Just a document that put into legal words what had already been true for months. Marlowe was not going back to the wild. His home, for as long as he lived, would be this patch of desert, this enclosure, this woman who had promised not to own him, but to be responsible for him. It's easy from far away to say what should happen in stories like this. He should be released. He should go to a big sanctuary. He should. Up close, with a living creature whose history you can't erase, the should softens into, what can we do that doesn't hurt him more? In late fall, as the cottonwoods turned gold, Evelyn watched Marlowe from the porch. He walked the perimeter of his space, then chose, all on his own, to lie down on the platform closest to the house. The gate to his inner den was open behind him. He could have hidden. Instead, he rested where he could hear her voice when she read on cool evenings. That's what this kind of love looks like in the end. Not possession, not perfection. Just a bobcat and a woman, each with their pasts, sharing a life with clear boundaries and a lot of steady care. In the last part of this story, time will jump forward. We'll see what happens when two paths that once tore apart, Noah's and Derek's, finally bend toward this little desert place where Marlowe chose to stay. If you've ever wrestled with a choice between what feels good and what you know is right, keep walking with us. The ending isn't tidy, but it's honest. By the time it happened, no one was expecting a moment. It was just another late summer evening in the high desert, the kind that slips in quietly, with a soft wind and a sky the color of cooled embers. Evelyn was on the porch with a book in her lap. The porch light was already on, casting a small circle of gold on the steps. In the distance, a truck eased its way up the gravel drive. Not fast. Not the kind of speed that comes from urgency. The kind that comes from someone who's been thinking about this for a very long time. Inside the cab, Noah watched the house get closer, then glanced at his dad. Dirks arranged it with the rehab center, agreed to stay behind the fence to keep things quiet. No sudden movements, no reaching out toward the bobcat who had once fit in Noah's arms. This wasn't about getting something back. It was about seeing what their choices had grown into. Evelyn stood when she heard the tires crunch. She didn't rush forward. She just stepped down a few stairs, one hand on the rail, and gave a small nod that said, "You found us." Introductions were simple. Name. Beyond the wire, the land was fading into blue. The cottonwoods were taller now. The solar lights along the path blinked on one by one, like a slow exhale. Marlowe, his ears flicked toward the quieter sound of unfamiliar boots. He rose, not hurried, not anxious, and walked the length of the fence once, reading the air. A wild, truly wild bobcat would have melted back into shadow at the sight of three humans standing together like that. Marlowe didn't. But he didn't rush them either. He stopped a few yards away, head level, eyes alert. Noah's breath hitched. He took no starving bobcat on a highway shoulder, just a living, breathing animal who had made it farther than any of them deserved. Dare stood switched slightly behind his son, hat in his hands. The last time he'd seen this bobcat, he'd been looking down at him through truck exhaust and fear. Now they were on level ground. No engines running. No decisions are being rushed. No one spoke for a long time. The only sounds were the rustle of leaves and Rufus chattering from his perch near the house, clearly displeased at the interruption to the evening routine. Eventually, Evelyn broke the silence, voice low. "He likes that corner," she said, nodding toward the section of fence where Marlowe always came to listen when she read on the porch. "Gets the best breeze. He can see everything from there." Almost on cue, Marlowe turned and walked to that exact spot. He sat down, tail resting loose on the platform, eyes moving from Evelyn to Noah to Derek, then back to the darkening horizon. He didn't pace. He didn't flinch. He simply chose to be there. If you've ever watched someone you hurt and wondered if they'd ever look at you without flinching again, you can imagine what that did to Derek. He swallowed hard, eyes never leaving the bobcat. "He doesn't look trapped," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Evelyn shook her head. "He has a good life. Not the one he would have had if things had gone right from the start, but it's his. He knows the sounds here. He knows the routine. He knows he's not going to be abandoned on a roadside again." Noah let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Somewhere in his chest, the picture he'd been carrying all these years, Marlowe thin and shaking, standing between the crate and the highway, faded just a little. In its place, a new image took root. The same bobcat, heavier now, sitting on a platform by choice, listening to crickets and wind and the steady murmur of a human voice he trusted. They didn't stay long. This wasn't a reunion about making up for everything or getting forgiveness spoken out loud. Before they left, Noah did one small thing. He lifted his hand, not over the fence, just to chest height, and gave a quiet nod. Marlowe watched him, blinked once, the slow, unhurried blink cats sometimes give when they are at ease, and then turned back toward the far side of the enclosure, where the scent of night was rolling in. Walking back to the truck, the porch light washed over all three of them, the same light that had been shining on dozens of evenings when Evelyn sat out here reading, with a bobcat's breathing just within earshot. It was a small circle in a big, dark, but sometimes that's enough. That's what this place had been for Marlowe. Not the whole wild world, not a house pet's life, a porch light in the in-between. Maybe you have a part of you that feels a little like that, caught between what you were taught to be and who you are now, between wildness and responsibility, between wanting to run and wanting to stay. If so, it might help to remember this. Healing rarely looks like going back to how things were. It looks like finding one patch of ground where you can breathe, one steady light you can return to, again and again, until your body finally believes you're not about to be left behind. For a young bobcat named Marlowe, that place was a desert enclosure beside an old shed, and a woman who learned how to love him without trying to own him. For Noah and Derek, it became the knowledge that even the worst day of their lives didn't get the final word. And for the rest of us, watching from the outside, it's a reminder that the smallest choices, a slower drive, a phone call to a rehab center, a porch light left on, can change the story for a life that never had a voice in the matter. Before you click away, take a moment with yourself. Where in your life have you been standing at the fence line, not sure whether to turn away or come closer? Who has been that steady light for you? And where might you be called to be that light for someone or something else? If Marlowe's journey from starving bobcat on a highway shoulder to this quiet, chosen place touched something in you, I'd love for you to stay with this little corner of the internet. Tap like. This story can reach more people who need gentle reminders like this. And subscribe if you want more slow, honest stories about wild hearts, human and animal. And if you feel moved to help rescue and heal wild animals like bobcats, creatures who so often end up caught between our world and theirs, you can use Super Thanks or the donate link below. Every bit of support helps people like Evelyn and the rehab teams keep the porch lights on, so the next Marlowe out there has a chance to turn back too.